Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I am Katrine Wind, and I'm going to talk to you about this river rafting design concept that I have developed over the last few years to try to explain what some of the stuff that I'm doing is based on. So first of all, I wanted to just give a highlight of the international Larps, the Nordic Larps that I'm doing at the moment. So I've designed a demon, which is inspired by his dark materials, and which is a dyadic Larp. And for that, I'm using some of the concepts from here, and there will be examples, especially pacing-wise. And then I do a boarding school version that I just made a Nordic Larp talk about. That is a anti-fascist Larp for boarding school kids who are learning the allures of toxic communities, also based on the demon world. And then I designed Helicon together with Maria Pedersen about the Greek muses being captured by some students of a British university and keeping all their inspiration to themselves, also a dyadic Larp. And then Spoils of War, which is a feminist fantasy allegory, take that, where some of these thoughts started. So I'll name drop some Larps just for like having some examples, but it's not important to know the Larps themselves for looking at the examples. Also, I'm gonna make you guys work a little bit in this. So strap in, and we're starting. Okay, first of all, I want to ask you a question. Have you experienced at any point that everything exciting in a Larp happened only at the end of it? Let's just raise some hands. Yeah, about half. Okay, I mean, I'm really impressed with that, because I can't tell you the amount of times over the last 2 decades I've tried to be at a Larp and then saying greetings for 3 hours without anything happening. So my initial thoughts around a lot of this came from really wanting to press a concept of front loading, of doing things earlier in the Larp. Because there are some things that we want to solve in this. Everything happens in the end at many Larps that I experience. Alexander, whom I design Spoils of War with, calls it the Twilight Avalanche. You're probably familiar with the, oh no, my mother died. Oh, I'm gonna marry this one. Oh no, the end of the world. Everything happens in the end, and there's just a screaming and like a resolving of plots and personal stories, but only in the end of the Larp. All secrets come out. That is not bad roleplay. I actually like a lot of that. The problem is that so much of the time leading up to it is pretty boring, or can be, at least. Maybe at least uneventful. So can we do something to counteract that? The third thing, originally also, that I tried to counteract is to not change the premise in the end of a Larp, so that we aren't actually playing the same Larp that we thought we were playing, like introducing a end of the world plot, or in Danish we call it the Saturday chicken, at the end of a weekend Larp, where the demon appears, or a god comes to Earth, or we are being invaded by an outside force, so that it doesn't matter that I had the fight of my life with my brother. So again, I want to stress, there is nothing wrong with an end-of-the-world plot, but it does cancel a lot of what else has been happening if that's not the premise of the Larp. So all of this is basically about what we talk so much about, which is expectation management, but this is an attempt to make that practical. How can we actually how can we actually explain what this Larp is about, and how do we explain that we would like things to happen before, and what can we do to make that happen? So, why then river rafting design, and why is that maybe some of the solution in some cases? Basically, this concept, before I explain to you how we do it, is I want more stuff happening in the beginning. So, not just at the end, but just more things that to play with, both amongst each other and in the Larp itself to begin with. But basically, what I really want is more opportunities for emotional and impactful moments. Because for me, the biggest problem with everything happening in the end isn't that it isn't worth it necessarily. It is then you have one shot for it to be exactly that LARP you wanted, and that defines then how was your whole experience. But if you have more opportunities along the way, you can pick and choose which ones you want to utilize for yourself. And I think there are design perspectives like this one that can help you create that and help your players create that. Besides that, I also want to help create better play opportunities, meaning that if you use this design, my claim is that you will have players practice their characters and the mechanics of the LARP earlier in the runtime, which creates for them both better play opportunities because they understand what this is about much before, but they also create better play opportunities for others. I'll also say, I think this framework is great when LARPs are designed for intensity. So, I mean, some elements are pretty universal, and I hope that you can utilize them. But if you want to make a very slow-boiling slice of life LARP, where you're not putting a lot into it from a design perspective emotionally, but that all of that has to come from the players, or it's very sandboxy, you might not have as much benefit from some of these concepts. But my claim is not only that you can use it as a designer, but also in sandbox LARPs, or even for your own character if you need something to kick you off, like at least I do. So, how then with the river rafting design? Basically, there are 3 elements of it. It is extremely general, but I'll give you some of the examples. I really try to stress that highly playable characters and setting is a must. And what does that mean then? I have received so many beautifully written characters that is prose that I could never produce myself, but where I have no idea what to do in the LARP with this. Characters don't need to be a certain length for this to be the case. But if you don't provide play beats of things you are actually doing in the LARP and things that are actually impactful while you're there, it might be really, really nice poetry, but it's not necessarily helping you play the character. For some, it definitely is, but I would like to focus on the things that will actually help you at the LARP during the runtime. The same thing with a highly playable setting. What is defining that? For me, it is mostly about, again, slice of life LARPs can be great, but I really like to do what I call epic play LARPs. There have been a lot of great articles written about that, and I'll put this into the end of this presentation. But epic play basically doesn't mean that like all emotion has to be epic or that the setting needs to be epic, but it means that it should be an extraordinary time in these people's lives. At least that there should be a reason why we're here, right? At the very least. It could be a wedding. That's good enough. It doesn't have to be like high-level politically epic, but there is a reason why we're here that is playable for us. So for Spoils of War, for example, I provide a setting where we are right at the end of a brutal civil war, and the whole world is involved on 2 different sides, and there are friends and enemies on each side, and we are now having to find out what to do going forward in this world. And so besides from the characters and setting, mechanics and workshops, like, again, these are super general terms, but what will help you with this is if you only provide a location and some characters, you are possibly creating a great framework for a LARP, but you're not necessarily giving the players many tools to pick and choose from and giving them many opportunities, because what if their most important relations don't work? What if they don't connect with what the character is supposed to do? If you put in both some workshops so that they can practice those characters and relations and the mechanics of the LARP, and put in some mechanics that are interesting to play with, that can give them something to hook onto. For school LARPs, it could be actually being in the classes. Maybe that could be interesting in this specific LARP. For Demon, I try to, you are playing 2 people, playing 1 character, so you are 2 players, but you can only go 2 meters from each other. That idea is from the source material, but the way I manifest it in the LARP is we workshop with strings with 2 meters between us to see what does it look like when one who is playing the animal is actually sitting on the floor. How far is this? And practice around with each other, and then practicing it without strings. That kind of having to have the spatial awareness of being close to each other while also having conversations or things happening around you is one of the really interesting mechanics of this LARP. So that is something to play around with if everything else doesn't necessarily work. As well, the one person being an animal in this LARP is also another mechanic. It can be another way to roleplay than you're used to, and that can be super interesting in itself. So adding in mechanics that are specific for this LARP and then practicing those thoroughly can be a really, really nice way to give people more opportunities to play around with what you're offering. And then finally, I usually have a tight management of the overarching pacing early in the game. Because what I often see with, the Saturday Demon is we're putting in the end of the world plot. We're putting in the monster. Now is the final battle. But people don't necessarily need that in the end because they did their arc. Like they practiced their character. They have their relations. I think it's much more necessary in beginning because when we act, we experience. So I want to, even people who haven't necessarily practiced their characters and their mechanics a lot yet, throw them into something from the beginning because then they have to, and then they practice, and then they learn. And then in this approach, we let go later because they have then practiced those things and they got this. So what I'm drawing here from the river rafting concept in general is basically it is about what is the individual emotional impact. That's the little boats in the river. So we're providing some tools for actually getting this to the finish line, to getting the little boats there. It can be like safety vests, it can be like tools like oars or ropes to connect you to others. So those are the tools, the mechanics that we provide. So in the beginning, we make front-loaded pacing, meaning a lot of stuff where they're forced to act. It doesn't have to be action, but it has to be something where they do something, have to do something as their characters. So we put in a lot of obstacles to make rapids, to make waves in the beginning, because they're practicing using the tools and, what can my emotional impact be? Practicing our characters, practicing the mechanics. And then we let go. Put in less and less obstacles from the organizer side because people got it at this point. You don't have to do a lot. And then they might even tie themselves together and get over the finish line and get more and more emotional impact. But if stuff happens up here that they have to react to, that really helps a lot of people getting more into their characters earlier. And even if there's something they don't like that they do because, I don't think I was ready for this. I don't think that was how I wanted to play it. Yeah, you still have 2/3 of the LARP left. Maybe you'll be fine, and you can actually adjust that. And that's also where the workshops can be really beneficial, because if the workshops are over here, even before the start line, right, then you have already practiced some of it, and then you are more ready to go into the action when we start the LARP. All right. So what I often see happens in LARP is that when you have the emotional potential, emotional impact potential from the design is, I call this the waterfall design. So when it's like the Hollywood model, we'll come to that. So when you put in stuff in the end, what often happens is the potential is like, you don't put in a lot of stuff as an organizer to begin with in the LARP. There's not a lot of potential for emotional impact that comes from you. And then it just, like, it really goes up in the end because that's where you put in everything. I think that you should put in stuff in the beginning, right? Not necessarily the same, and you can keep on doing it through the LARP, but I would just suggest that you let more and more go until the end. You can have an end scene if you like. It can be impactful, but I mean, if you are relying on that moment to be where it should really culminate, and this is what they should remember the LARP for, why are they there for 2, 3, or 4 days before that, right? So that's the impact of this. So it's really important to say, this is not the curve of drama that I'm aiming for the players, right? For many, it will probably still be that they will like go up in the end and like there will be some kind of culmination, and because that's just how we play. But if we can counteract it a little bit design-wise, there is just more chance that the more possible people can have possibly more emotional impact opportunities. So it's just statistics, really. And I think we make the odds better by doing it like this. So I'm going to go specifically into some of these concepts, and then you're going to work a little bit afterwards. So the highly playable characters and setting, what can help create something like that? I think complexity is pretty important. I've seen quite a lot of characters where there has been one situation, one point of drama, one picture that was in the writer's head when they were making the character. But if there is a unsolvable conflict, if there's possibly relations with more people in them. Again, I will say there's nothing of this that is rocket science. I'm just talking from a lot of experience of this not being done a lot, and especially not systematically. So complexity, and also teaching your players in that way that when you try to solve a problem, make it worse instead. That can really help you have something like to do and to have more emotional impact through the whole LARP. You can, like I said, what is your starting point? Like, are you doing epic playstyle or more over towards a slice of life? Even if you are doing a more slice of life LARP, maybe you could do something as the first thing that is super like much what we're doing in this village. It could be, instead of taking the party that we do maybe once a year, why not start with a meal that we do every day? So like we have to do this thing that we're gonna do through the LARP and that we can enact our characters in. Regarding relations, like I said, I think I see a lot of relations where it's two people having some kind of connection, and I think it's underused with the factor of not having like groups, but having really intimate personal relations where you are, for example, a friend group of 3 people, where it's like a 3 siblings instead of 2. I understand where we come from and with the personal relations, but I really don't think that it's necessary, and I think it can benefit a lot from not having to carrying that relation on your own. So like expand them, make more people involved, make more people care. That can really help. And then again, give opportunities for taking action. The thing you're writing the character for, is it actually possible to do that during the LARP? Is there going to be moments where you can show you are the rebellious daughter, or isn't there? So, I mean, you have to make sure that it really fits the LARP. And the setting itself, if you are in the end of a war and then you have to negotiate what happens now, if you never have a chance to impact what happens now, either you are a character completely without agency and then you have to have a lot of other things going for you, or you're not actually a part of the key concept of the LARP. So why are you there as a character? Why are you even important there? Regarding mechanics and workshops, I would always suggest just have a few core mechanics instead of putting in mechanics for everything, because mechanics is something people will focus on if they're there. If you have 1 or 2 brilliantly like designed mechanics, I'm not talking just safety mechanics and calibration mechanics, that can be besides, but something that is specific for the gameplay of this LARP, I think it's always more interesting to play with. It could also be like a certain power dynamic. I know an example from, I think, 20 years ago in a Danish LARP organization called Einherne. They were making a LARP about a village society, but they were very adamant that the only people, it was like really patriarchal, but only women could handle money here. So it was like they made a whole game about like trading and about like negotiating in this village, but it was only the women who had the power to handle the finances. And I mean, that doesn't sound like anything special necessarily from the outside, but when you work around it and when you workshop it and when it's important for the characters and gives some interesting conflicts in the LARP itself, then it's actually valuable to have something to play around with as the players, because this mechanic is also something we can be together about, something we can always go back to. Another example is a demon where the vision is you are two people playing one character, and you cannot play this LARP wrong. If you experience being two people who play one character, you have been playing the LARP right, and you cannot break the LARP in that way, so you both don't have to worry, but always go back to that if your game is not working. So I think like that can tie it up to the visions, right? Obviously, another way to do it is off-game instructions. Like I said, none of this is rocket science, but the off-game instructions of what to focus on can be extremely important, where I think we're often super nice and soft as organizers, saying like, yeah, there are all these play opportunities, take what you like. Sure, that's great, but what is the most important? What do you think this LARP is about? At least if you communicate that, you make it easier for the players. I also really like to make poses and calibrations during the LARP, and I said in the pitch for this talk that it would be a good idea if you just know a little bit about the classical triangle of gamism, narrativism, and immersionism. So I'm going to talk from that. You guys know what that is, or else come talk afterwards. I've talked to a lot of people who are very immersionist, like that they want to that they all often tie that together with wanting to play through the whole time that we are playing. I mean, immersion is definitely an important aspect. Also, I'm super narrativist, right? But it is important for me to have that feeling of immersion as well. I just think some narrativist tools are better, for me at least, to experience that and to go deeper into the characters, and also to not run like with a version of the LARP or a version of my character that I don't like and not reflecting on, am I even having a good time with this? Pauses and calibration breaks gives me a really good opportunity to do that, so I get more immersed in that way. But it doesn't mean that you have to have pauses for it to be a good experience, right? So this is just a tool that you can use. For example, I make people sleep off game at my LARP so that they can have some time to reflect and just get a off game good night of sleep, and then we'll start again and see can we dive deeper. And then I also do, for example, calibration rounds, where I ask around if people can, if they want something from the group. Now, this doesn't work for everybody, and you have to be very careful because people are very polite and will not necessarily ask for something. Others might ramble for 10 minutes about how they're doing and what they're going to do today. But, I mean, if you can be very specific about, try to talk to the person next to you. Is there something you need from the group? Is there something that would be helpful for your play that's not from individuals, but that the group could help with? Something like, I really would like to get into a fight today. I don't know how to actually do that. Would anyone be able to help me with that? And would they like to? And then often people actually do, because we do want to do stuff with each other and collaborate in that way. And then I also really implore people to then do it. Do it soon. As soon as we go in game, figure out a way that you can actually do it, because there's nothing worse than asking for something, and then people are like, yeah, we're going to do that, and then nobody will. So only volunteer if you actually have the brain space for it, but then no obligation. So that is an example of a calibration break. So, I would like you to just talk for a minute to the person next to you, 2 or 3 people, about have you been in LARPs where calibration breaks have been beneficial, where they have been super annoying, or where they have been handled in a good or a bad way? So just if you'll just take a minute and talk to each other, then we'll take a little talk about it. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, I would like if there could be a few people who would say something of what they talked about. Anyone has any insights they would like to share? Yeah. Oh, just for the microphone, sorry. Just if you can speak into that.
I mean, yours is not working, just so you know, unless it is for the camera. Okay. So, yeah, we were just talking that calibration gets uncomfortable if it's too long and too unspecific. Like, these were the two aspects.
Agreed.
I have been on a LARP where calibration was very necessary and didn't get done until after the LARP was over. And that was very irritating and almost hurting the LARP from after view, because the calibration was done when there was nothing to do about it. And they didn't know it was a technique to calibrate underneath the LARP.
Thank you so much. Any last ones?
Yeah, I've been to numerous LARPs with calibrations, but 9 times out of 10, I'd say they've been half-assed. Like, we have a break here, and during this break you can have lunch, and this is also a good time for having a nap, and also calibrate amongst yourselves. Hardly ever works.
Sounds very, very relatable. Okay, so we'll have a little chance to talk a little more after this, but I completely agree, because do we agree what calibration is? Huh? We are from so different play cultures that I think you need to explain to people as well. You have to make it visible. What is calibration to you in this LARP, and what would you like them to do? Because, players are pretty good at doing what you ask, and they believe that you actually have an idea with what you're doing if you're doing it clearly and kindly, right? So what I said before with how I do the calibration rounds in some of my LARPs is an example. That is not calibration as a concept. It is my version of calibration in this LARP. Then there are versions of calibration or elements of calibration where it is little like adjustments that you can do during the LARP. For example, I always introduce the words off game. If there's something you need very quickly in a little sentence, off game, you're standing on my dress. Off game, the house is on fire. Off game, like anything you need to communicate to the other players, right? So that they know that it's an off game, that an off game comment. That's not necessarily something everybody wants. Some people really, really don't want any kind of meta communication during the LARP regarding off-game issues. Then you'll just have to live with it and then figure out what you're going to do about it yourself. That's completely fine. It's just a version of calibration that I then introduce. Okay, so yes. The other flash talk I would like to have you guys look at is tell each other about an example of a mechanic that really helped lift your gameplay in a LARP. So a LARP where it's not just someone rented a venue and wrote a character. Something that was a mechanic of the LARP that was super interesting. Please. Okay, would you like to share a few examples, please?
Yes, at the LARP, the trip, they had a really cool mechanic where, this is a horror LARP, they had these red lights. And if you are within these red lights, then you know it was a possibility to get killed. That was part of the mechanic. But you could always walk away. And it was really immersive to know these red lights were coming towards you and you could get killed, but it also gave some control to the player to be able to either engage with this if this was what you wanted, or to walk away if you want to run away.
Thank you. Gavin?
I have two examples, but I have to pick one, right? Yeah. So in one of the campaign labs I'm in, they have this sentence say, "Trust me, I'm an expert," which is basically a meta technique saying whatever you know out of character, my character knows better. So don't correct me on this. This character knows what he's talking about, even if me out of character has no idea what this is.
Wonderful. Okay, last example. Mika?
In the many immersive Finnish LARPs, it's very difficult for the organizer to know and other people to know if somebody's having a great time being miserable or if they're actually having a miserable time. So in one LARP, we introduced this like a bench. So if you sit there, you're actually hoping for some new interaction or some like a please give me a quest kind of thing.
Wonderful idea. Cool. Thank you so much. So these are great examples of mechanics where some of them can be more like safety based or how is your LARP going, and others can be things to play around with. For example, when I was in this really nice Arthurian sandboxy Danish summer lab last summer, Hiller Air, designed by Paul Sinding and Anna Foss, then we had like group time, like we had a lot of time where it was sandboxy. So, but we thought in the group we would like to do something just in our group. It was not something the organizers did. It was something we wanted to do to have fun, where we wanted to introduce a mechanic for how can we have actual fist fights without it being a duel and killing each other, because that's not what we want. So we set up an alibi that we had a violence culture in this group. So like violence in general was pretty normal. And it was only when you drew your weapon that it was actually serious. So people would be like, girls will be girls or something like that if someone was fist fighting or like pushing each other. So they would be allowed to and not stopped or white knighted. But if they drew a weapon, it was actually like really serious. And then during dinners, we had a rule that we have like a table seating, and then that is the time when we are not allowed to do violence in any way. Which means that's obviously when you would bring up the things that people would be really angry about, and then they couldn't react to it. Like that created a lot of tension, and that was designed in our group, and it wasn't important to anyone else, and it wasn't important to us that it was the whole LARP doing it, because it was just our thing. And I think that is super valid to introduce, especially into sandboxy LARPs, and you can do that for your own character as well, or for one relation, as long as it doesn't disrupt the overarching thing that the LARP is doing and the collaboration. I think this is a great thing to introduce into many LARPs. Thank you so much for your great examples. I promise I'm done talking on you very soon. So I wanted to say like something about pacing, because I think pacing is the thing that I've been struggling the most with in many LARPs, and why I felt stuck with everything happening in the end. I think there is some very good reasons that this has been the case, because if we are looking at the classic Hollywood model, that is a lot of media that we are consuming, a lot of cultural projects we are consuming have this structure. There is a like slow beginning where it's inciting the incident, there's a confrontation, a climax, and then the resolution in the end. Like this is super, super like simple, right? Obviously there's a lot of things that aren't that, but it's a story that we know. I think the problem with this structure in a LARP in general is that there only is one overarching story or pacing in these kind of media. It is controlled all the way through that this is the story we are telling. But as players and as characters, we are telling many different stories, and one pacing or one story arc from the organizers is not necessarily meaningful to all of us, especially later in the LARP. So my point would be that if you add big common events at the end of the LARP, like this Saturday chicken, then it will be meaningful to some, or some have been bored, some have been waiting for it. For some, it was the meaning of the character. For others, they are somewhere completely else because they've been practicing the characters and mechanics in other ways since then and have taken their stories in wildly different directions. So I would think that you have an opportunity to affect players in a more structured or at least predictable way in the very beginning of a LARP, and to push them in a direction where it's meaningful to the most possible people. So if you turn it around like that, I don't think that the arc of the players, again, like I said, would be that everything happens in the beginning and then nothing in the end, because they will take over. But I see a lot of players needing a little push to get into action. I do, at least. But I will say that it's a good idea to communicate this, because there are some people who really don't like it and who want some time to just play themselves slowly into something. And if that's what you're doing on purpose, that's great. But if that's the default, I'm not sure it's the best or the only way of doing this. So I wanted to just give you a few examples of what I've been doing. This is from my river rafting article from last year's KP book. I did river rafting pacing in Demon. So first of all, I divided into act structures. That's an old thing that people have been doing for decades, also way before I did. So this is just my version of it in this LARP, where instead of having like a instigation and a conflict and resolution, and the conflict is from the beginning in this LARP. And then there's taken direction in the LARP, and then resolution in the end. So let me be specific here. So for Demon, we just killed God, and some didn't. Someone were on the other side of the wall. So what we do is we create an alibi for these people to be together. So some of them are meant to be together to figure out what happens in the new world and to celebrate the fallen war heroes. And then something happens so that the enemies are caught up in the same place, and they have to be, and they are quarantined there. But we have to coexist with people we really don't like. So we start with these people who are not welcome arriving, and they have to stay, and they have to be included, because we use nobility and our statuses in society as an alibi for why we have to include them in this place, and we have to try to be proper to them, even though they are ex-fiancés or people we fought against in the war. And so we start with that, and then things calm down a little bit. But then we award medals to the war heroes, but the people they won over just arrived. So that's a lot of tension coming in again. Then we go to dinner, where there's suddenly a lot more people. So we make some horrible seating plans off-game, obviously not in-game. We were just busy. So we make some dinner warfare with 2.5 hours of snickering remarks and horrible seating plans. So this is me adding this in, right? People are acting out their characters, practicing the mechanics, getting some time to being forced to sit with people they really don't want to sit with, so they don't run away from their negative relations. And then I let go a lot, so people play freely from then. And then the act 1 ends with a medal ceremony and political. There's a political debate right in the end, but there's a memorial ceremony where we celebrate the fallen war heroes, amongst others, people who have been fighting some of the people here and some of their loved ones. So that's how Act 1 ends. But then what I do on day 2, when people have been sleeping, we've been calibrating, is I also make front-loaded pacing in Act 2 to keep people. To kick them right into Act 2 with another part of the lab where fringe science is really important. And that's basically where I let go. So when I say Act 2, go, then it's basically just the players from there. Then I introduce again some dinner warfare where they have an option to off-game choose who would they like to sit with or not sit with, and then we can play around with that as a concept. But basically, I do nothing from here. And I think that works in a way that people in 1.5 days usually say, I don't want to play again tomorrow. So like they got so much out of it in that very short playtime. And I will also say like this started as a like very practical thing, because these are very expensive locations, and if we should lower the price just a little bit, we could only be there those days. So that's how it started to begin with, right? So there's definitely like practical aspects in this as well. But I will also say it is a way of chamber LARPifying our LARPs to like try to make more emotional impacts rather than going around and looking for each other during the LARPs. Okay, so character setting, mechanics and workshops, and then pacing most of all. I think pacing is where you can really like help your players in a way that's not necessarily done in all LARPs today. So that's river rafting design, and I wanted to ask if there was anyone who had some reflections or some questions.
So, do you understand correctly that the elements here are the rocks in the river, so that they're elements that you as a game master introduce, and the idea is that the intensity of the emotion and the drama still goes up, but that's they need less and less.
Yes, exactly. For the players, this might not. For none of the players, this is the most dramatic part of the LARP. But it is where I introduce the most, because it would start at floor level if I didn't. So definitely, I think for most like players, it will still be like a curve like this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's it's about separating the pacing of the LARP from the pacing of each individual player. Yeah. Okay. Thing in the back.
What do you do if it don't work? Have you ever been in that situation where your theory that they will take over didn't happen?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay. Have you ever been in a situation where the players didn't make more plots, that they just left off and waited for you to make more? And what do you do in that situation?
Yes. I definitely experienced players waiting for me to do stuff, and then they probably didn't have a good time. Or else I'm in there as a facilitator character, and I try to kick them and see what happens. Or we have calibration rounds, right? Where then if they express it to me, and if I really try to encourage them to say like, if you're not having a good time, say so early. Maybe we can actually do something. But I mean, there have been people having horrible times at my LARPs or being really bored. So that happens. And I mean, my point is exactly, if I then try to fix it by, maybe we could put in an end of the world plot or a demon, like then, I mean, that is probably disruptive to the other players. So I think my impact and to be in a relevant, like give relevant impact is here, and not when they're not having a good time here.
Okay.
Elton?
Thank you so much. I have a question that about the pauses and calibration. How do you go back in? Do you place a convenient stone?
So like how we go back in from the act breaks. So for the for example for Helicon, Maria and I have a theme song, and then that plays every time we go into or out of the game. That is the case with Spoils of War as well. For Demon, especially for the ending, there is a playlist of 15 minutes of 5 songs where there's lyrics. There's been ambient music the whole way, but then the lyrics come, and that's your sign of like wrap up your scenes, and then it gets louder and louder and ends with Mr. Brightside, so you cannot be in game anymore. Yeah, really. But like this cutting-edge scientific lecture is a way where I ask the players that they are then starting off. So when this person starts talking, like Brian and Alexandra will do in May, when they start talking, we're in game, and then people might not. They might be just looking at a scientific lecture, but they are very much encouraged to be like outraged about it. It is like super edgy. It is like devastating for some of them what's happening there, and then they can actually engage with it. So that's a way to do it. I think we have one last question.
Making this work at scale. If you have a lot of players, if they are spread out over a large geographical area, or if your game doesn't lend itself naturally to this kind of scheduling of like having it would be normal for people to show up at this and this time because that's what's been decided. Is there a smart way to work around those kinds of logistical issues of gathering people up and making them obey the schedule.
Right. I am endlessly impressed with people who can make bigger LARPs. I don't think I can. But I mean, I think a good way to do this would be you don't have to have the same start scene. You could start individually in your groups. You could start in different ways. You don't have to start like as a communal scene. That's not the point. So, but making people show up on time is possible if you communicate it, and if you are strict time management, please do it more. Yeah, so that you can actually make people do that by also like keeping to the time schedule yourself. So thank you for that segue over to that. I spent all of my time now. Thank you so much for this. I'm very happy you came and saw this, and I can't wait to play more with you guys.